The stress in modern life is unavoidable. But what if I tell you that I believe that stress can be channeled into something positive? I actually believe that. I think stress can actually be good for us. Let's talk about the stress in modern times. Raise your hands if you ever had to work long hours in the office because you have a deadline. You ate junk food, right, because this is the only thing you could find. And then you go home, and after a short night, you had 20 emails waiting for you, all of them urgent. You have to answer them right away, right? And if your job involved traveling like mine, then just add lineups at security in airports and even delay flights to that mix. Raise your hand if after 3 weeks of traveling constantly on business, you wake up one morning and you think, oh my God, I am going to be late to bring my daughter to school. Jump out of bed, and then you look through the window and there is a river. And you realized, I am not home. You realize that you are so sleep deprived that you lost track of where you were. Although this might seem like an extreme example, that actually happened to me about 3 years ago, and I thought I was losing my mind. It was extremely scary. Raise your hand if after a long day at work, you are overwhelmed because you're stuck in traffic, you're going to be late to pick up your children at school, and then after that you have to drive them to soccer classes, you have to buy groceries, prepare dinner, prepare lunch boxes, reply to the messages to your mom because she cannot wait, pay bills, all of these before you actually can go to bed. Isn't this life exhausting? It is. It is very exhausting. I think we are experiencing what I call stress saturation. And when we don't have the ability to channel that stress positively, then we get to experience stress oversaturation, which brings many negative consequences to our lives. It really interferes in how we relate to other people, interferes with our productivity at work, and even affects our mental and physical well-being. In fact, the proportion of mental illness in Canada is actually going up. And if we look at the statistics, the percentage of Canadians 12 and older who actually perceive their mental health as fair or poor has been going up over the past few years. But even more concerning, mental illness is actually the second leading cause of hospitalization for people 15 to 34 years old in Canada. Second cause. And it's the third leading cause of hospital admission for people 35 to 44. So this is actually quite concerning. And if you're a caregiver, and by a caregiver I mean if you take responsibility, provide care to a child with a disability, a friend, or a family member most likely to be an aging parent, you're even more likely to experience stress oversaturation. Caregivers are actually more likely to report a higher levels of stress when compared to the general population. They are more likely to report mental and physical distress, including anxiety and depression, and they are more likely to report less satisfaction with their lives. Now, who are these caregivers? Caregivers actually, they are any one of us. They could be any one of us. More than half are women. The majority are actually employed, which means that they are juggling their caregiving responsibilities and their jobs. This is not a short-term assignment. It's actually long-term. The majority of them report providing care for over 4 years. So imagine that. And a very important proportion of them also report financial difficulties because they have to cut the number of hours at work or they have to leave work completely, which adds a lot of stress. Now, what if I tell you that this is something extremely concerning because our demographic trends indicate that this phenomenon is going to continue increasing. Now, caregiving for somebody is a very stressful and demanding experience and can lead to stress oversaturation quite quickly. And I know that because I've been through that. I have provided care to a friend with a mental illness. My friend is very smart. She is strong, beautiful, she speaks 3 languages, professional, independent. But when she is no longer able to control her illness, she becomes agitated and she cannot take care of herself. Last time she needed in-hospital treatment, I was in Toronto. The situation was so chaotic in Ottawa that I spent the majority part of the day on the phone trying to diagnose and help. I actually made the trip from Toronto to Ottawa in 3.5 hours. I hope there is no police officers here. I was really, really stressed. She didn't want to go to a hospital, but I knew I could convince her to go. So I picked her up, brought her to the hospital, stayed with her until she was admitted. By the time I got home, it was almost 3 a.m. in the morning. And I had a very important meeting at the office at 10 a.m. And that day, at the end of the day, I actually had to pick up my children in school. I am divorced, and I have shared custody of my children, which means that whenever they are scheduled to be with me, I am the sole caregiver for my children, too. I found myself really stretched. The weeks that follow after that were so exactly the same things that we had experienced before. We had to deal with the clinical team for my friend. We had to deal with my friend's employer. We took care of her finances, pay her mortgage, make sure that the utilities in her condo were all up to date, brought everything that she needed every day, did her laundry, visited her several times a week at the hospital just to keep her company and ensuring that she was fine. All of these really stretched me to beyond my limits, actually. And I felt that I couldn't perform at the office, not at home, properly. I felt that my life was really falling apart. I have 2 other caregiver friends who kind of share that responsibility with me, and they were experiencing the same. One of them had a migraine that lasted for weeks, and the other one actually required counseling. It was at this point in my life when I realized that something had to change, something had to give. And I started seeing myself as a giving tree. I realized that we have the strength to support the people we love. But if we don't take care of our tree, if we don't nurture the roots of our tree and feed the tree the way we need to, then our branches become weak and they break, and we are no longer able to support the people we love. It was at that exact point in my life as well that I came across with a phenomenal health psychologist from Stanford University called Kelly Mcgonigal. Kelly was giving a presentation about how stress is good for you. And I said, what? Wait a second. That round totally counterintuitive. And it was against of what I believed and what I actually had perceived. But she got me thinking, and she led me to find out a lot more. Kelly reminded me that stress is not always bad. I'm more productive and even more creative when I have a deadline. But what Kelly said is that by choosing to believe that stress is good for us, that means that stress can give us the tools to be more resourceful, we change our body's response to stress. And to me, that was eye-opening. It means that we have the ability to really transform how our body responds to stress if we change our mindset. Kelly shared the results of a fascinating study in the US, looking at stress and mortality. What this study did, they actually recruited 30,000 people, 30,000. And they asked them 2 key questions. 1, how much stress did you have last year? The second question was, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? These were the 2 questions. 8 years after, they waited 8 years. They went to the public health records to see what was the proportion of these people who had actually died. This is what they found. They found that high levels of stress leads to an increased risk of death by 43%. Well, this is to be expected, right? So if you are stressed, you're more likely to die. But this is the fascinating thing. That risk of stress only applied to the people who believed that stress was harmful. The people who had high levels of stress but did not believe that stress was harmful didn't see the same risk of death. In fact, these individuals had the lowest risk, even lower than the people who reported low levels of stress. Isn't that incredible? So after this, a plethora of new research has actually emerging in trying to understand how our mindset, how what we think about stress have the potential to change our response to stress. It's our biology of stress is actually changing. And the biology of stress is actually quite complex, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details. So basically, we have two different threat responses to stress. One is a threat response, and the other is a challenge response. In a threat response, and they are both very complex, as I said, and they involve the brain, involve many organs, and are very heavily modulated, but a lot of hormones. But I'm going to point out the difference, what happens in the blood vessels, because this is important. So in a threat response, the typical reaction is that your blood vessels will constrict. They will become smaller. And what happens is that decreases the ability to bring energy and oxygen to your brain and heart. When that happens over a long period of time, that leads to increased risk of cardiovascular disease. But in a challenge response, that is not the case. It's actually the opposite. Your blood vessels stay relaxed. And that gives you the ability to bring more oxygen and energy to your brain and your heart. So imagine what that could do for you if you were in a challenge situation. And actually, I'm going to share with you another study that looked at that. It's the links between stress and performance. This is another fascinating study. So researchers from Harvard University and the University of British Columbia selected 60 students, college students who were about to take a test, an admission test to enter a PhD program. This is typically a stressful situation for the students. So the students were invited to participate, and they were invited to take a practice exam. What they did, these students were all similar, academically very similar. What they did is that they divided randomly in two groups. One group got a pep talk, and the pep talk basically said this: recent research suggests that stress doesn't hurt performance on this test and can even help performance. People who feel anxious during a test might actually do better. It went a little bit longer, but you get the idea. The idea was, this is not necessarily bad. You are feeling a little, anxiety. That's good for you. This is the amazing thing. This is what happened. The students who got the pep talk actually did better in the practice exam. So one of the explanations was, well, maybe the pep talk helped them to relax. Maybe the pep talk helped them to calm, and they were more able to control the nerves, and that's why the performance was better. But the interesting thing is that their stress hormones were measured in their saliva, and these students were actually had higher stress response than the other ones. So what the researchers concluded was that there was a stronger stress response led actually to better performance, but only for the students who received that pep talk. And amazingly, these same students overall performed better on the real test 3 months after that, and no more intervention was done. This is actually quite fascinating. And why do I bring all of this? I bring it because I think there are opportunities for us to change our biology of stress to protect our physical and mental well-being. And this is extremely important for caregivers. As I said before, the demographic trends in Canada, we are expecting to see a greater number of caregivers. And with that, we'll see a greater proportion of the population who will be at risk of having physical and mental burden. And although the healthcare system and our public policies are trying to catch up to make sure that we help these individuals better, I think there's a great opportunity for us to do more to help ourselves. So I think if you have to start thinking about what would your giving tree would look like, how would that be? What would be some of the values and the principles that would fit the roots of that giving tree? What are some of the things that you would like to add value? How would you like to help the people you care about? These are all very important questions that can help you shape that giving tree. For me, the giving tree requires many different things. We have heard, for example, many, many times that we can take different steps to protect ourselves. How many times we've heard that we need to sleep more, we need to eat better, we need to exercise, meditate, mindfulness. There are so many things that help. But we don't necessarily take the steps to do that. And I believe that when the right mindset kicks in, we're more able and likely to take care of all of this. For me, my giving tree, I require exercise. That's quite important to me. And it's not easy because I travel often and I have a very, very full-time job. So for me, in order to keep on track with exercise and keep my sanity and my mental health in good shape, I really need to plan it. I am committed to it, and I need the support of my family. My daughters know that this is important. I have very specific rules to protect my time, and my Saturdays and Sunday mornings are sacred. They really protect it. Another thing that is important to me is actually my social support networks. You'll see that at different times, you will see that your giving tree will change. But the important thing is that we need to have the capacity to understand what is it that we need to do to bring that tree back to life and make it flourish so that tree will stand strong for the people who depend on us. Going back to the social support networks, this is really important as well. I have people that I see often here that I call when I am overwhelmed. Some others I don't see often. I keep a virtual group of my friends from university who many of them I have not seen in over 20 years. But when you have somebody to share some of your joys and your sadness, life looks a lot better. So these are some of the things that are important. So if you have to think about your own giving tree, what would it look like? What would be the actions that will help strengthen your own giving tree? What would be some of the principles and values that will help you shape some of the decisions to keep that tree in good health? These are some of the questions that we should be asking. I really hope that from my perspective, it all starts with the right mindset and the belief that we can harness the power of stress to access the resources that we need to be successful. All of you have the resources you need inside. What are some of those? Hope, courage, sense of humor, problem solving, tenacity, perseverance. These are some of the resources. All of you have them. So the question is, either you are going to let stress destroy you or make you stronger and more resilient. Thank you.